Always choose to talk.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to
He's often called Nigeria's national conscience and Africa's most compelling literary force. Wole Soyinka, the Nigerian poet, playwright, and activist, was the first black African to be honored with the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1986. He celebrates his 80th birthday in July. His life, a long commitment to social justice and the arts. Many of Soyinka's writings have been concerned with the tensions between tradition and progress, his disillusionment with African authoritarian leadership, and with Nigerian society as a whole. One of the most controversial writers of his generation, Soyinka has been a thorn in the side of many Nigerian dictators, his outspoken activism landing him in jail and eventually forcing him into exile. Wole Soyinka is one of the most controversial writers of his generation, with passionate expectations of a free and democratic Nigerian state. He's traveled around the world, but always returns here to Abeokuta, a historic city just outside of Lagos. This is where he spent his early childhood and where he still finds his inspiration. At a time when Nigeria faces its toughest security crisis in decades, we speak to one of its most prominent voices. Wole Soyinka talks to Al Jazeera. Wole Soyinka, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera. Thank you for welcoming us in your lovely home.
You're welcome.
Professor Soyinka, I'd like to talk about the current situation in Nigeria. There's been a great deal of attention on Nigeria since the abduction of more than 200 schoolgirls in the north. Are you glad, Professor Soyinka, that the world is finally paying attention to a conflict that had been widely viewed as an exclusively Nigerian problem for a long time? Or are you saddened, perhaps, at the negative light it's shed on Nigeria and on its leadership in particular?
Well, glad would be the wrong word. I believe that the world, and as I said this at the time, the global community is coming to an awareness that certain problems are not specific to certain areas, but are actually global, both in actuality and in what it portends. And I have stressed the fact that our soldiers have served in so many places outside the world, and this kind of affliction is of the kind which requires both political, social understanding, but also requires, much as one doesn't like the word, requires a state of war, a mind that is in a state of war. And other people are more experienced in certain aspects.
But it is somewhat surprising that Nigeria, which has, as you say yourself, one of the most reputed armies on the African continent with successful peacekeeping missions in countries like Liberia and Sierra Leone and so on, hasn't been able to maintain security within its own borders. How do you explain that?
Well, in this particular case, is very poor leadership. It's over-concentration on the politics of the situation, you know, how to retain power and so on, that it's neglected what it's actually elected to do. And so the security situation, which is quite obvious in its possibilities, in its development to so many people, myself included, and voices have been crying out that we are in a serious security, appalling security situation. But this was neglected, and so it festered. And now it's virtually, well, very nearly out of control.
What do you make of the reaction to the abduction of the girls? You know, it seemed to have captured the world's imagination, with Hollywood getting involved, Michelle Obama getting involved. Do you wonder sometimes what the world saw in that particular event?
The world didn't get to see it the way I see it without some very serious prodding, both high level, public, you know, the movement and so on and so forth, but also through direct approaches to some of the ambassadors, some of the diplomatic representatives who are here, to whom we were able to say, listen, don't isolate Nigeria over this issue. And fortunately, since they're intelligent people and they're on the ground, they knew exactly what we were talking about. They knew that there's a history behind it which guaranteed that this would get virtually, you know, would escalate intervention.
When I talk about capturing the imagination of the world, it almost seems like it's a story that fits an expectation, certain expectations of what should happen in a country like Nigeria, of what should happen in Africa.
What should happen, I see what you mean, what should happen before it's worth paying attention to it. In other words, the negative aspects. Well, it's a rebuke both against Nigeria and against the world community. The sort of almost subconscious need to point a negative finger at Nigeria assists, and then you convert it to something positive, which is concern.
Some outside of Nigeria may see this as an interesting time because, you know, Nigeria has become Africa's leading economic power. There's oil, there's gas, and so on. So the timing is certainly interesting to look at, is it not?
It was rather like the negative icing on a rotten cake. And so we should understand that, well, again, the ambiguity, people love bad news about others. At the same time, we have to recognize the fact that, and I have met people like that, who genuinely appalled and concerned. And then a mixture of both, and then a group who sees this as part of a global menace, which has got to be stopped before it expands to other places.
How do you stop it, Professor Soyinka?
I see it as both a military solution, sooner or later, but at the same time it has it requires, even if it's in a short term perspective, it requires very subtle diplomatic deployment of intellectual resources.
But when you haven't resolved the entrenched poverty, the issues that are affecting northern Nigeria, does it really come to you as a surprise that we're seeing a group like Boko Haram in some parts of northern Nigeria that are being not applauded, but certainly people understand there's a certain resentment, it seems, towards the government in the north because they feel neglected and marginalized?
Well, let's divide Boko Haram into segments, sort of hierarchies. Those who unleashed Boko Haram on the nation are not poverty-stricken. They're politicians, very well-to-do, but want to do even better, quote-unquote, in their own way. Desperate for power, but intelligent enough or perceptive enough to recognize that the cocktail of politics and religious fundamentalism can only yield them dividends. They think they have nothing to lose. But the foot soldiers have been indoctrinated for years,
right,
from childhood. And they believe, if they're told, for instance, your religion is in danger, go and kill. They do not think
Islam is in danger.
As it is.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, the religion is not in danger. Islam is not in danger. It's the pervert, followers, the perverse followers, those who debase religion itself, who are being used and who use others and proclaim that they're fighting for Islam. So we have a situation where even those who unleashed this menace on the nation are now in danger because the foot soldiers, in many cases, have become very, very, quote-unquote, radicalized. And they've looked even at their mentors, their puppeteers, and they say, wait a minute, you're not practicing true Islam. And so they turn against them. And so the perpetrators, the real organizers, original organizers of Boko Haram, are looking towards the government for support. So the bottom line really is that we have a motivating aspect of this insurrection which cuts across class, position, status, wealth or poverty. And if you look at other nations in the world, Nigeria is not unique about that. Look at Algeria, and that's part of the poverty of thought and knowledge of some of the leaders. They cannot look outside and see what happened elsewhere. If you look at Algeria, if you look even at parts of Afghanistan and so on, you find that religion itself on its own is a powerful motivating factor without even complaints of government neglect, etc.,
Right.
etc.
I'll come back to the issue of religion in just a moment, Professor Soyinka, but just on that point, one gets the feeling, and I might be wrong about this, but one gets the feeling that even among Nigerians, the insurgency in its 4 northern regions for a long time was viewed as something that could effectively be contained and had little impact on the South, the oil-rich South. It almost seemed like Nigerians didn't want to be confronted with the divisions and the fragmentation that exists within Nigerian society.
Yes, I've remarked this often, that the nation in the main is still, even now, in denial. Those regions which are pretty well to do, and lots of resources, and are not immediately affected by this insurgency, they believe that it's something which can just be contained, it's something remote. And we have to keep reminding themselves that, listen, look at the histories of the world. Boko Haram, if not contained and eradicated, will be found in the heart of Lagos before you know where it is. And we've been saying that for years.
Right.
And indeed, it's been established that there are cells which exist in the southern parts. So I've urged and continue to urge that we better regard this as a national issue.
You've strongly criticized the Nigerian military in the past. You've criticized, people like Sani Abacha and so on. Some Nigerians that I talked to today, you'd be surprised to hear, say they long for the days of military dictatorship because at least then there was security. What do you make of that?
Nigeria is desperate. Nigerians are desperate. And it's not unusual to find people who long for not so much the good old days, but the more capable, more efficient period, of military governance. But a larger number recognize the fact that the military has shot its bolt, and that they proved every bit as corrupt, if not even more corrupt, than civilians have been in the past and in the present. So it's a mixture.
It's a mixture. So when you assess the different administrations, whether civilian or military, what would you say is the most critical problem of governance in Nigeria?
Today, it is security. I'm the first person to admit that. There are other issues, of course, like public services, electricity, potable water for many areas still, in spite of the fact that they're sinking boreholes all over the place. We hear borehole commission, there's so many, and in fact there's still a small proportion of those who have access to potable water. So there's that. Then there is the mammoth problem of institutionalized corruption. All the way down, from the very top to the bottom. Now that is the reason why many people remember one or two military, shall we say, presidents or leaders who had no time at all for corruption. Then that becomes the sole issue, but it is not the sole issue.
Let's talk a bit more about religion, because you started talking about this. You've written that there's an epidemic of religion in Nigeria and in the world, and you say you'd be happy if religion were taken away altogether. So do you think the world would be a better place without religion?
My fear is that the devil always finds work for idle hands. If you take away religion, something even more nasty will take its place. So I speak both subjectively and objectively, that I'm tired, historically, of the amount of havoc religion has done to the world, and it's still doing to the world.
Now, you're a religious man yourself. I mean, your parents were Christians, Anglicans, so you were brought up as a Christian.
I've studied religion. I cannot say I'm a religious person. I think I'm a deeply spiritual person. But organized religion, in my view, is more a curse than a blessing. I believe that religion should be very, very personal. State should not interfere in it. I don't understand why, for instance, the Nigerian government wastes so much money in sponsoring people on pilgrimage to Mecca or Jerusalem. They call themselves Jerusalem pilgrims today. And the amount of energy and resources actually spent on religion is staggering. Let people manage their own spiritual beliefs.
It's interesting that you say that, because an expert on religion in the US was saying that the paralysis of the Nigerian government and military in dealing with Boko Haram comes of out of its over-reliance on religion, if you will, that Nigerian society and the government, it's one that's too steeped in religion sometimes, and that this is...
Well, that's part of the reason for lack of development, because people go and suck this sweet, this panacea in churches and forget their wars, their problems for several days, and then they go back again, and they're giving reassurances, there's a better place, all the suffering will be resolved either here soon or on the other side. And some take this to extreme, that they believe that even the more they kill other religionists or those who don't practice their own religion strictly the way they want to see it, that when they kill them, when they torture them, the gates of paradise open wide. Can you imagine any kind of article of faith embodying that? But I'm afraid this is what many of these Boko Haramites, what they believe in. And even the religious extremists from other religions like Christianity are not much better in terms of belief, but they're not so violent.
You had political ambitions at one point in your life, Professor Soyinka. You founded a political party in 2010 called the Democratic Front for People's Federation. Why did you throw in the towel?
No, I didn't start a party for myself. In fact, the problem with the party which I started for youth who were complaining that the old fogies were not giving them space, this party was strictly for them. And the reason why I sort of stepped aside, if I quoted, use a notorious quote of one of our military generals, dictators, the reason I stepped aside was when I found that many joined the party because they thought I was running, I intended to run for president. And I said, you must be out of your minds. Would I start a party if I had some ambition? No, I would go join another party, let them do all the hard work, and then I would run.
But even so, you seem to have evaded the seduction from by the reigning political parties, the powerhouses. Why is that? Why are you so outspoken when it comes to politics, but yet don't get directly involved?
Well, I have a temperament which is not suited to the level of compromises which politicians... politics, you know, is a full-time occupation. You have to study it, you have to be an apprentice, and that means you have to learn everything good and bad and practice many things, both good and bad. And I'm a little bit inflexible, you know, about my beliefs.
Well, getting involved in politics got you into a lot of trouble in the past. Your book, The Man Died, dealt with your period in jail during the 1967-1970 war, the Biafra War. For our viewers who might not know, Biafra was the name assumed, of course, by the seceding southern section of Nigeria. The war saw the massacre of mostly Christian Igbos who lived in the predominantly northern parts of Nigeria. You got involved in this Biafra issue, which remains today a very sensitive issue in Nigeria, and went on from being seen as a mediator in the Biafra crisis to a troublemaker. Tell us about that time.
Well, I don't know that I'm a troublemaker. No.
Some people see you as a troublemaker.
I wish life was as simple as that. No, I grew up, let's put it this way, I grew up in certain circumstances, very conscious politically, nationalism, etc., etc. In this very Abeokuta where we are seated, my mother was involved in the politics of the town. My auntie, Mrs. Ransom Kuti, was a leader.
Yeah, because you're cousins with Fela Kuti, the legendary
Now,
Fela
that
Kuti.
one is a troublemaker, not me. Or was. And I grew up among arguments, political arguments, issues which really concern humanity. And I found that basically I gravitated towards recognizing the basic worth of human beings. I sometimes tell people not to call me a patriot because I don't agitate on behalf of some entity called a nation. I agitate on behalf of humanity.
So on which side were you on the Biafra issue?
Oh, I was very much pro Biafra in the sense that I recognize the fact that the Igbo had been wronged very desperately. They'd been brutalized in a way that justified their feeling they were not part of the nation. Let me also say this. Biafrans were not entirely innocent in this affair. They were not. But the unleashing of such venom such devastation on them as a people was sufficient to justify their decision not to want to be part of the nation. So I was pro-Biafra in the sense that I felt they needed justice. It wasn't that I was for Biafra as a national concept, no.
Chinua Achebe said he was disappointed by the fact that Nigerians weren't learning about Biafra in school. Why is that?
Officials especially do not want to confront their own history, especially a history of which, in the making of which they themselves feel uncomfortable. But if we don't confront our own history, and that's a cliche, if you don't confront your past, you're going to mess up your future. It's obvious.
Yeah. Nigeria is not engaged. It seems that Nigeria doesn't want to engage with its history and with Biafra in particular.
In denial, that's the expression, in denial. Nigerians are still in denial.
Many people worry that what Boko Haram is doing right now in the north might lead to a breakup of Nigeria. Others say we are too interwoven to split. Where do you stand on this?
Ironically, Boko Haram might be one of the reasons why Nigeria will stay together. And this is because nobody likes to leave, nobody at least who has a conscience, a sense of responsibility, of even neighborliness, would want to leave a neighbor in the lurch. A few years ago, I would say that Nigeria was very close to a breakup. But as I said, it's a kind of paradox. But now that one section of it is in trouble, there's a pulling together, there's a pulling to a consciousness. We spoke about this earlier. It hasn't yet reached the critical mass of identification with the area which is in trouble.
Right.
But the conscience of many Nigerians has been awakened, and they feel they cannot abandon this section.
So how do you stay together with all these differences?
If, however, we recognize, in fact, the plurality of Nigeria, recognize its history, how it came together in the first place, then we will be able to devise and adopt a method of governance, which can only be one of massive decentralization. You see, that way Nigeria can stay together. We continue to have a centralist governance. Nigeria is on the brink.
Do you still today feel, because of your outspokenness, that there's some sort of threat against you?
Fear, arrest perhaps? No, these days elimination seems to be the preferred,
elimination.
Elimination. We had more political assassinations, mysterious killings in the last 10 years than even during the period of the military. It's a strange phenomenon. And I don't think it's likely anybody would want to imprison me at the moment. They probably think I'll find some other ways of writing.
The Nobel, 1986, the Nobel Committee awarded you with the Nobel Prize for Literature. Why do you think it took such a long time for the wider world to recognize this African talent?
Well, my answer to that is very simple. It takes a while for peoples to be educated about others. Others are always at a remote distance. What pertains to others often strikes one as exotica. Seems it doesn't belong to the kind of discipline which to which you're accustomed. And so for me, it has never been a surprise.
What was it like? How did your life change after the Nobel?
Oh, it's become too hectic. Much too hectic. My constituency, which was already large enough, just ballooned out of all sense and proportion. And it's a struggle to try and be yourself, what you really are internally, when you're sort of surrounded and overwhelmed by the sheer weight and dimension of your constituency.
Do you see anyone of your stature or your reputation that can take over the mantle from you? Is there another Wole Soyinka in the making right now?
There are several. The problem is that Wole Soyinka is still around, and that people are lazy, and they don't look in other directions, and they will find a lot of very, not just brilliant writers, but sincere activists, political activists, concerned humanists. Oh, they're all over the place.
Now, for any writer, there's the inevitable question of influence. What would you like your influence, your enduring legacy to be, Wole Soyinka?
Oh, simply recollection of the fact that I passed through.
That's it?
That's enough.
Thank you so much for talking to us, Wole Soyinka.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.